So, good news and bad news in the world of comedy. Dave Chappelle recently performed, and it seems that there's going to be a resurgence of live performances with comedians, which obviously declined due to the crisis. So, that's good news. But obviously, the bad news probably outweighs the good with the passing of Paul Mooney and Charles Grodin. I'll start with Grodin. I am familiar with his work slightly more than Paul Mooney. He's done quite a few things. He's done classical films such as Catch 22, King Kong in the 1970s and 60s, but obviously it's really in the 1980s he kind of grew in prominence in small roles in Ishtar and things like that. Now, I know him primarily as starring in Beethoven, which I still like. He also did a very good cameo in Dave, an Ivan Reitman comedy. He also was in Clifford, starring Martin Short, although that was very controversial. Probably the most well-known role is him with Robert De Niro in Midnight Run, which I still think is very good, but it's not representative of his talent. So he's been in a lot of roles, but no breakout role that made him a superstar. In the 1990s, he basically was a talk show host for a long time. He also did work for 60 Minutes and had some final starring roles in a film with Adam Driver near the end of his life, as well as some other projects. So, again, a very varied career, but a bit all over the place and never gained household name status. Paul Mooney's a little bit different. He is a black comedian who worked with Richard Pryor. He's done quite a lot of writing for Living Color, for Sanford and Son, Good Times. He also worked on Brewster's Millions, but him and Pryor have a very controversial history. He's been accused of raping his son. Again, I want to stress it's an accusation. And Richard Pryor's son denies that Mooney had anything to do with it, but he was a drug addict at the time, so things might have happened between them. We don't know. But probably by far his most notable contributions were with In Living Color, where he was a head writer. And although a lot of people say he's principally responsible for creating the character Homie the Clown, there's really no strong evidence of that. He definitely was very, very critical to the early history of In Living Color. And in fact, just how controversial he is hard to assess because, again, there was actually a lot of censorship at the time. While we may think that the show was very controversial and edgy, apparently they did pull back certain skits which they filmed, and they actually did, but decided not to air. And going back, if we can look at some of his original scripts and see how far he wanted to go with the show. In terms of more modern comedy, that's probably his biggest contribution. But he's also been many film roles, including a kind of little but critical cameo in the film Bamboozled with Spike Lee, where he played Damon Wayans' father, ironically, and he plays a character called Junebug. So a very interesting comedian, but very, very controversial, and especially talking about celebrities. He was very willing to say some very, perhaps, too controversial things in terms of his joking style. Joked about Diana Ross's husband dying and where you stand. That may have been a little bit too offensive, but he considered it completely legitimate. He also did some work with Dave Chappelle on the Chappelle Show before he died. So a very long and very various career, working with Spike Lee, working with Pryor. But again, probably someone you don't really recognize from the street. Again, like Grodin, he never achieved superstar status. He's been in tons of things, so if you look out, you will see him performing as an actor as well as a comedian. But again, neither one was a major superstar. But Grodin, I would say, probably on balance, was the more mainstream star. He did things with Carson, Letterman, and others. So he's much more a fixture among mainstream comedians. And also did stuff for Saturday Night Live and things like that. And Paul Mooney also did some things more mainstream, but again, he was much more relegated to a specific audience and a specific kind of era in terms of black comedy. Again, overall, a very difficult, controversial comedian to assess. I can only say I know his work a little bit. With Charles Grodin, I know his work a little bit stronger because I specialize in 1980s and 1990s cinema. And Dave was huge. That was a huge hit. I actually forgot he was in the role because it's a small role, but it's very critical to the film. And I'm going to do a video essay on Dave because unfortunately it's very still relevant to what's happening today. So again, a lot of great roles, but again, unless you're really a film historian or a film fanatic, you probably keep missing him. But he is there in quite a few roles. King Kong, Catch 22, Dave, Clifford, Beethoven. It's a lot. It's a lot. So it's quite interesting assessing these two different careers from two very, very different kind of comedians. Although I'd stress that Charles Grodin is not as sort of mainstream as I think he might appear. He did do some subversive comedy. But again, for whatever reason, just never achieved superstar status. Sad to see them both passing away, but quite a contested legacies, I think, for a while in terms of assessing what they mean, not just for comedy in America, but I think overall in terms of American culture. All right, this has been Pop Cult Analyzing on passing of certain comedic legends recently. Thanks for listening.